Welcome to the Redeemed Vision podcast, where we bring sight to the blind and freedom to those enslaved by our pornified culture. Here, we dive into hard but important topics such as pornography, sexual identity, true freedom, real love, and living marriage well. Go deep with us as we uncover what redeemed vision means for each of us living in the world today. Come to know yourself, the power of redemption through Jesus Christ, the joy of laughter, and how to live in gratitude and wonder. This is Redeemed Vision.
Welcome back to another edition of the Redeemed Vision podcast. I am your host, Steve Pokorny. I'm the founder of Freedom Coaching, where you can find out more of our work at freedom-coaching.net. It's an honor to be with you today. We have a very exciting guest for you. Before we get into that, a little housekeeping for you. One of the great gifts for the church that has been a lot of people around the globe has been the app Hallow. It's the #1 Catholic meditation prayer app for meditation and prayer, and I encourage you to download this today to find peace, sleep better, pray more, and deepen your relationship with God. So if you go to hallow.com/freedom coaching, or put Freedom Coaching there in the code when you go and sign up there, you're going to get 3 months free. And after you continue with that, because I'm sure you're going to want to, you're going to be able to support this great work that's here. I encourage you also to click the bell if that's available there, to subscribe to this podcast, and especially share these important topics that are so incredibly neat for the world we live in here. And the other aspect, if you're looking to support this work, Freedom Coaching Foundation Incorporated is our 501c3 that allows us to take in scholarship funds to help those who can't support fully the need to breaking free once and forever their attraction to pornography, and the work we do with Freedom Coaching, and also helping to get the word out in the work we're doing, such as the podcast that you're listening to now. So I want to encourage you on all of that. Now, since we were last together, our family was nailed by, we think, coronavirus by the bug. My wife got it, then I got it, and one of my daughters got it. My other daughter didn't get it. And I have never experienced that kind of pain in my life, right? And it was like, I like to describe it as a belt going around my waist and a black belt in Taekwondo repeatedly kicking me in the back, and then it radiating down through my legs and all over the place, and then radiating other places, right? And so that was quite an experience. And I think a lot of us who have heard this have gotten nailed by this bug. And I want to use that as an analogy for the world we live in, that we have all been impacted one way or another by the wound of divorce. And it impacts all of us profoundly. I mean, the line goes that I'm fine, we'll be fine, the kids will be fine, right? But for any of those who go through this situation, who go through the divorce, especially for the children who are growing up from these broken unions, fine is anything than what they're finding their experience to be. And why is this? Well, it's because this is not what marriage was supposed to be. It is not the way that God designed this. And for the children of divorced parents, for especially those who find themselves as adults, but their parents at some time in their life, they got divorced, trying to make sense of life, of love, of the pursuit of a forever union can be incredibly damaging, or incredibly damaged, shall we say. So causing us to think that, maybe my heart's desires, my deepest desires, they're just impossible dreams. It's just a utopia. Well, like everything we do here in this work of both Freedom Coaching and the Redeemed Vision podcast, we like to say that nothing is wasted and everything is redeemable. And to unpack this discussion today, I want to call in a very special guest, a friend of mine from years ago, but also an expert in this field. And his name is Dr. Daniel Meola. He's the co-founder of Life Giving Wounds, And this is he and his wife Bethany have been working. I say on this mission. I always hesitate when we began it because I think the beginning of a mission usually goes way beyond this. But Dan goes back, and his wife Bethany go back to the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family in Washington, D.C. I'm also a graduate. Was in their class there. I think I was in their class before. And he has been leading retreats, support groups for adult children of divorce or separation since 2015 in the Archdiocese of Washington. And it was in 2018, there we go, as I look at my notes, founded Life Giving Wounds with his wife to spread this retreat, spread these support groups, spread other elements of ministry to adult children of divorce or separation around the country. So these and Dan also has a background of over 15 years running retreats, giving presentation to various groups, including youth, young adults, engaged couples, and families. He and his wife Bethany live in Maryland with their 2 daughters and a cat. So Daniel, welcome to the Redeem Vision podcast. An honor to have you, sir.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for that beautiful opening to this topic too. Glad to be here with you and your audience. Hello.
And awesome. An honor to have you, my brother. So I want to go back because obviously some of the greatest strengths that we have oftentimes come from some of our greatest detriments, or that's just, I think that's the way that God likes to work here. So can you take us back a little bit? What is your story? What kind of brought you into where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm an adult child of divorce, as you mentioned. I've dedicated my life to helping to heal adult children in divorce separation through Life Giving Wounds. It's a peer-based Catholic ministry that is founded on the premise to give voice to the pain of adult children in divorce and to bring them Christ's healing through retreats, through support groups, online ministry, content, etc. We set up chapters across the country. But yeah, the story goes way back to my own experience. I'm an adult child divorce. My parents separated when I was 11, and actually were separated for 15 years and didn't divorce till I was 26. So actually they were in the middle of divorce when we were at school, Steve, at the Institute, finally divorcing. And I remember, obviously for many reasons, but they divorced the same year I got married. So anyways, there was this long drawn out family brokenness, I would say, in my family, and needing to heal from that definitely played into my desire to create pastoral ministry for this group of people in the church, which had yet to have a particular pastoral ministry for them. I can say a lot more about my story, but did you want to jump in there at all? Ask any questions?
I do. I do, and actually, it's interesting what you just said, and so I'm going to say this, and then we'll go back. The year in which my wife, so just a kind of a counterpoint, the year in which my wife and I got married, both sets of her grandparents were celebrating 50 years of marriage. So this is 2009, right? You're married in 2011. And so obviously for and they're still married. I mean, their health is declining, but that's a huge witness, and was a huge witness to us. And there was a blessing given to them at the wedding ceremony that was there. So obviously the year that you're getting married, what was your, where we're supposed to learn what love is all about, what marriage is all about, is I'll use the phrase torn asunder here, right? So obviously for you going back, you said it was about 15 years in the making, at least, right, of them going through divorce. Growing up in that situation, right? Growing up in a situation where you know things aren't right. When do you have a conscious experience you can share when you were growing up that you're like, something's not right with mom and dad with the relationship?
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely come from what is called in the scientific literature a high conflict home. There was a lot of regular fighting, a lot of times where I had to cower in my bedroom, sort of like alone, trying to comfort myself with the cat. And so I knew that they had problems, but it was like Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, the thing that a lot of people don't realize, like when you say high conflict, it doesn't mean it was always bad, right? There'd be really great moments, and really bad moments. And actually, that's one of the things too, is I've gone along in my healing journey to realize that it wasn't just conflict that I had triggers from and having to heal from that, but also when good things were going well, I sort of distrusted, because again, in my family, it'd be like the best of times and the worst of times, the best of times, worst time. It was like this roller coaster, right? And it's important to acknowledge that in our healing journeys, because something I learned much later in my healing journeys was like, oh, I actually was on more guard when things were going right than when they were just going poorly. Because I was like, okay, is the other shoe going to drop? And this is actually a very common experience with a lot of us adult children divorce too. We can distrust joy, we can distrust good things. And of course, this plays into relationships in a big, big way. And of course, it played in my relationship, not just dating Bethany, but previous women that I had dated. I was always on edge when things were going right, which is so counterintuitive. Like most people, when things are going right, they're like, hey, this is a good relationship. For me, it was very anxiety provoking. And that definitely goes back to my younger days. So yes, there was a lot that was very obvious, but what I most deeply desired though wasn't for them to separate or divorce, and I know some children divorce wish that, but if they plumb deeper into what they ultimately desired, it was for mom and dad to work it out in a healthy way, to reconcile in a healthy way. Of course, they had to change behaviors, but I mean, that's our deepest desire as kids. Even if we come from a high conflict home, and I have a lot of sympathy to kids who, I mean, again, we're kids. You just want the fighting to stop. Maybe you said, oh, I want mom and dad to separate and divorce. And of course, the church allows separation for a time, and very extreme circumstances too. They even permit morally divorce. But again, it's important to recognize what our hearts most deeply desired was for our parents to reconcile and to work things out in a healthy way. And so that's why the church always talks about it, even in cases of abuse. Civil divorce as a means to protect yourself is always a last resort. But anyways, I digress. The point is, to go back to your original question. Yeah, I knew things were wrong, but I always thought that they would work it out. They're on again, off again for counseling. During that 15-year period, there was a lot of ups and downs. Then at a certain point, my dad just sort of cut it off. So even though the divorce came a lot later, I sort of knew, although I still always desired the reconciliation, that they would work it out, that this probably was not going to happen. And so I had to sort of accept the suffering and reality of which all the circumstances of parental divorce and dysfunction in my family. And I had to work on that healing. And so I was very intentional working on the healing, but there's so many layers. And of course it came up in my marriage prep for when I was marrying Bethany. So I had been working on my healing for a number of years, and then boom, it opened up again. And I just say all that. I want to let you get in here and have a conversation, because I feel like a lot of times one of the most annoying myths that I find in my work is that if your parents divorced or separated when you were a kid, yeah, you should have that pain in the past, but there's almost something wrong with you if it continues into adulthood. Like, you're on your own, like, let it roll off your shoulders. You must be stuck in self-pity. Like, what's your deal? And all I would say to that, I would say a lot to that. I hate that. That's a myth. Look, the actual separation of your parents endures, and so it continues to affect you. It continues to hurt you every time you confront it. Now, you can have peace, you can have healing. I'm not saying we don't want to wallow in self-pity, but it absolutely affects adults, even if it happened a long time ago. And I'm exhibit A as just one thing I want to put out there, because we get asked a lot, why deal with adults and not just children? It's like, well, this issue keeps coming up in adulthood, and we got to address it in a holy way.
There's so much here, Daniel. Let me see if I can articulate this and bring this out. And I think for every single person, as I said in my intro here, has been touched by divorce on some level or not, right? And many people directly because of their own parents have gone through this. And then there's the creation of a cycle of divorce that begins to come in here, and then a whole notion of just get over it. With the work that we do in freedom coaching, especially, right? They're just dirty pictures. Get over it. Well, there's a very significant level of trauma that goes in here, right? Nobody enters into a divorce situation unless there's pain that's been involved, not just being invoked by their spouse, but there's other stuff they haven't worked on here. So the whole notion, I hear you, just get over it, just move on, and I think it's one of the weaknesses of our culture also, right? That simply doesn't be the Instagram, the social media culture, whatever I'm posting. Yes, you have some people that are emotional vomiting everywhere, but a lot of people are trying to put up the pretty picture. It's got to be perfect, right? Unlike what, again, I'm sorry if I'm gonna steal some of the background here. This is I think the third time we're finally being successful, thank God, to reschedule this interview, because your whole family got sick and they're dealing with all the stuff, the mess of here. And one of the things that you expressed to me was, I'm so sorry that they're so sick. And my respect is, it's life, right? We do need to get healing there. So obviously that's on a physical level, but this stuff doesn't just go away. We need to acknowledge the pain. We've got to get real about this. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are so appreciative, is we don't sugarcoat here. We want to get into the real stuff and realize that, like, I'm not okay. You're not okay. And it's okay. And we're going to work through this together. And I think that especially with the work you're doing, and we'll unpack more, especially how you do the work you're doing in a little bit. But I want to throw in a softball question to you. Hopefully it's a softball question. If somebody said, right, well, let's come from the banal, like, divorce, just get over it, right? There's nothing really wrong with divorce. It just happens. He's an apple, you're an orange, get a divorce, right? What would be your response to them in coming from the perspective that, divorce is pretty destructive? Here's why. What would you say?
Oh man, I would first say, listen to the adult children in divorce. Listen to their stories. Listen to their stories and use that as motivation to work on your own marriage. But I would also say it's good for you too. It's good for you to work on your own marriage, to work out those character differences, the incompatibilities. Usually the places where you're incompatible with your spouse are the greatest opportunities for your own growth, your own healing, your own holiness. And as difficult as that may be, and again, I'm talking here now, again, if it's an abuse situation, get the safety, right? Get the safety. Those people, they need counseling, they need some serious help. But for the situation you described, Steve, incompatibility, come on, like, please, like, men and women to some degree are always going to be incompatible. We're not the same. But those opportunities,
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. But those differences, when leaned into and learned from and grown from, are the biggest opportunities for grace and healing. And but I will say, because I deal with the children all the time, the adult children now, that this is a tremendously deep, painful wound that affects so many levels of the person's life. It's not true that the pain your children face is something temporary, short, only when they're kids, only for a short time. It's there's a very good analogy. Judith Wallerstein, who was a sociologist who wrote on this, said it's deceptive. Divorce seems like it's just one moment in time, but it's like throwing a rock into a still pool, and it just sends out ripples throughout the whole person's life. It leads to a whole chain of events that can be very damaging. Now, again, there's always healing. There's always hope, even if you come from a broken home. And some of the most remarkable people I know are from a broken home. But to the parents, please look at these stories. We've now had prolific, widespread divorce for 2-3 decades. Please, the stories are out there. It's almost overwhelming. And do it for your kids. And I also say too, like, not just for your kids who are growing up, because the message seems to be getting across more and more to, like, at least during the developmental years, to hold off on divorce. But sadly, we see that the greatest rates of divorce are now in what's called the gray divorce, when couples are in their 50s, 60s. They wait for their kids to be 18. And so there's more and more children divorced coming at adulthood, like during adulthood. Now, we minister to everybody whenever the divorce happened, whether it was, adulthood, or you were 3 years old, or whatever, you can't remember it. But those kids are tremendously affected too. Tremendously affected. And it's not true that just because they're 18 and they're adults that they're not going to be affected by the breakdown of their parents' marriage. It doesn't matter when it happens. It's tremendously devastating. And we know that from God's word. We know that from objective truth, from experience. Sometimes sociology and psychology points to it, not always, because it's abstract science, but sometimes they do. And just to, please reconcile if at all possible. I mean, I guess that's if at all possible. And I think most marriages can be saved. And again, there's some instances the church makes provision for. If there's an abuse situation, absolutely get to safety. It's not morally wrong to protect your family. But most divorces, I think, can be prevented. So please reconcile. Reconciliation's a real option. Our world kind of gives you two options: to just continue with whatever struggle you are having, and it's just going to be misery, or this quote unquote freedom of divorce, getting out of that. Well, there's a middle way of reconciliation, of working it out, the sacrificial way. So, we sometimes just reduce our choices to two, and there's a third way. There's a third option. It's not easy. It's definitely a sacrifice. It's a suffering. It might take a lot of work. And here I'll give a shout out to my friend's work. Layla Miller has a great book called Impossible Marriages Redeemed. And it's all about couples who really struggled in their marriages. Some of them got divorced, some of them got separated, and they were able to work it out, to reconcile. Actually, I got asked this question. I was given a presentation in Colorado Springs, and I said that there was a divorcee who asked, what can divorcees do? And my first thing is always, if at all possible, reconcile. Now, I get it. It's a two-way street. There's a lot of divorcees who would love to, but the other one has checked out. So I also am very sympathetic to those who've been divorced against their will, those who maybe want to reconcile but can't. So I get it's not fully in your control, but if at all possible, that's always the first thing. And then my second thing is to grieve with your children, to actually take time to grieve the loss, this loss that you cannot make up for. Okay. So Christ can, but not you. So, and we can talk about that, but the thing is to do that. And I was giving this talk at Colorado Springs, and there was a woman there who was a divorcee who was like, I'm actually going through the reconciliation stage. And it was just Praise beautiful. God. She's like, thanks for saying that. Cause she's like, hardly anybody like says that anymore. So I always have to say, if at all possible, reconcile. And then there's other things you can do when that's not possible, which we can talk about, but I want to talk about the children. So yeah.
Oh, this is Dan. You are a fire hydrant of good things. You're kind of like me, and this is why we get along probably so well. There's so much here, and so I just want to kind of unpack it for those who are hearing this, right? And again, I'm speaking with Dr. Daniel Meola of LifeGivingWounds.org. And again, on one angle, again, we're saying obviously the church in very limited circumstances, if there is the need of physical harm, right, separation certainly can happen. But outside of those, oftentimes those are very extreme, right? Outside of those situations, we got to come together. We got to work on these things because the ramifications are like what Daniel said very clearly. That ripple in a pool, we don't know exactly what those are going to look like. We oftentimes suffer from short-term meiosis, right? We only see where we're at in this moment. We don't have that extended vision, that redeemed vision that we need to see, that God really can work in the midst of this, right? And I love the fact that you're using this language, there's a third way, right? Can I find a third way? This is one thing that, is where we're working with clients in the work we do, is to help them. One statement is, I find a third way. I find another way through this. And again, our way, especially as Christians and Catholics, we don't believe in avoiding pain necessarily, right? And so I'm not saying to go grab a hammer and go smash your head. No, that's the kind of pain you can avoid. But life is hard. And our job is not to try to avoid the cross, but with Christ to carry our cross. And here's the ironic thing is, he wants to help to carry the cross. He wants to help to carry the cross in our marriage. And one other piece here that, two other thoughts that are coming to mind as you were in that last segment there, Daniel, was a resource that I also recommend. Again, it's now a little dated. It came out in 2000. But the truth behind it is still very valid. It's The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. I think it's Judith Butler. I think that's who the author is. I have the name correct.
No, it's Judith Wallerstein.
That's who it is. Thank you. Not Butler. Sorry, Judith Butler. Very different situation.
She's a radical feminist who
yes,
I do
exactly.
know about, unfortunately.
We do know that was one of the people I think we studied at the Institute. So yeah, Judith Wallerstein, and she actually is not against divorce. It's one of the things to pick up there. But I encourage, even yes, it's slightly dated. Put it on your nightstand. In a certain sense, like every couple should have this somewhere near there to realize that our actions, what we do, really do impact here. But this is where, especially that secular book, we as Christians really do believe. We as Catholics believe that these marriages, just like the resource you gave, any impossible marriage can be redeemed, right? There may be a very hard road that needs to be walked through, right? And as a man who I've struggled mightily in my own marriage, right? There's a reason I'm a freedom coach, not a marriage coach, right? I got my own issues and working through these things, but I know just how important marriage is to my wife and I, but especially how important marriage is to our children here. So, and Daniel, I want to change the direction of the conversation just briefly for a moment, because we can focus a lot on the negative, and I like to say, right, where our focus goes, our energy flows, right? So let's flip it around, because I don't think we talk enough about the good news here for a second. So I'm going to throw you another softball question, two-parter. Well, maybe it's a softball, but we'll try to keep it succinct. Here we go. What is marriage, and why is this so important? Why is it worth fighting for?
Marriage, or are we talking about why is it worth fighting
marriage
for?
Marriage in general. So what is marriage? Because most people have no conception of this, right? Marriage can just be whatever it is. Like love is love, marriage is marriage. It can be whatever. But I want to throw that out. And also, why would you say marriage is so important?
It's funny you call these softball questions, but I mean, the reality is these are really deep, important questions that we continue to reflect upon. And, obviously got a Ph.D. in marriage and family, theology of marriage and family. And so I've given my life to reflect on the mystery and the beauty of marriage and family. So I could say a lot of it. But no, I mean, the church is really clear. What is marriage? It's to be faithful, it's to be fruitful, it's to be total, it's a total self-gift. It's to include Jesus Christ in it, in the sacrament, free, total, faithful, fruitful, lifelong. These are core elements of, again, the church gives a simple definition. Love is total self-gift. Marriage is that total self-giving to another person. A consecrated person makes that directly to Jesus, but that total self-gift to the other, of holding nothing back. Love holds nothing back, and it receives everything back. I think that's the other thing too. It doesn't just give; it receives everything back. So, I mean, again, for us, we're talking about the effects of parental divorce. I mean, God wants marriage to be lifelong, but it's also the human desire. I mean, who can say I love you and truly mean it if it doesn't also follow, I want to love you every single moment of this life. I want to give you every moment in this moment. And I get it. There's gradations of love, like there's friendship love, there's filial love, and I'm aware of the medievals, but just, the different levels of love.
I love my pizza. Yes.
Yeah. But for marriage, there'd be something weird if you got up in front and you didn't somehow apply, I want to give every moment in this moment. It's like, oh, I just love you in this moment. Like, if you said that, like at your marriage vows, there'd be something wrong and strange. Like, dear, I fully and totally give myself just in this moment. And we'll see about the next. And we'll see about the next. And we'll decide a little bit later about the next. Like, that would be like neurosis for me, right? Like always worry that every moment you have to just, but no, I mean, there's this human desire to give every moment in this moment, There's something of love that desires to be lifelong. And so, the church has always taught this, and the Bible has always made that very clear. A marriage is supposed to be lifelong, and that's why too. The Catechism speaks about divorce is against the natural law. It's against our natural desire for love, and we intuit that. But now we've sort of deadened our senses, deadened our desire, because I think of widespread relational wounds. To be honest, I think a lot of people have given up this ideal, this goal, because of their own relational wounds that they've experienced. And that's not just family of origin. Maybe they've been in a very bad relationship, right? Maybe they've used others and been used by others, right? And we start, tamping down that great desire and settling for counterfeits, settling for counterfeits of temporary love, of hookup love, of love until the feelings go. Love that's only happiness. Well, happiness is important to love, joy is important to love, but the other side of it is self-sacrifice. It's a self-giving and a receiving. So anyways, why is marriage worth fighting for? It's the desire of our hearts. It's the desire of our humanity that fulfills. And again, I can say that because I also have an understanding that marriage, to be complete, needs to involve God. Because of course, there's only a part of our heart that is satisfied by God. So, and also there's a part of us, we're made for God. And if we don't also give God in our love, there is something still lacking that's not yet total. So also when I say that marriage fulfills us, I have this deep, rich sense of marriage in the sacramental sense as being what's ultimately fulfilling. Of course, marriage at the natural level also fulfills our human desires, but ultimately it's this inviting God into our love. So it's the sacramental marriage, which the distinguishing mark of sacramental versus natural is a sacramental marriage would be between two baptized spouses. Why is that baptism important? Because they are inviting Christ right into their vows. They're into the presence of their love. So there's like a depth there, but it fulfills natural marriage, because natural marriage is a total self-gift. We seek to give everything, and the deepest part of you is God in you. So to give God in you, you need to receive grace through baptism, and then through the sacrament of marriage. Baptism conforms us to Christ. Sacrament of marriage conforms our love together as man and woman to Christ. So anyways, a lot could be said there. I mean, I've given my whole life to this. I continue to reflect on this. I mean, it's a beauty and mystery. The greatest things cannot be spoken about in a quick 1 minute.
We will never end the amount of we'll run out of words before we run out of really getting this utter reality. And so I think I'm sitting here and my heart is full as you're sharing this, Daniel, because I think you started off with this, I think, a beautiful definition. I don't know if I've ever really heard it this way. It's what we're made for, right? We're made for union and communion. A vast majority of people are called into this great sacrament. The vast majority of Catholics are called into this great sacrament. And it's what we're made for. And I think that's why it's such a tragedy when this breaks down, right? But we're seeing this so common as we've normalized this, that I think because it's happening so frequently, we just expect, all right, this is just the way that things are. And you said of such an important word: we settle. We accept the world that's been proposed to us. And I like to say to all of us hearing this, like the old Kellogg's commercial, Kellogg's cornflakes commercial: taste this again for the first time. Come discover again the beauty of what the church teaches about what marriage is. And I think an important clarification, Daniel, that I think we need to make is marriage. Yes, it's what we're made for. It's what will fulfill us in a very real sense if we enter into it. But here's the clarification: marriage will only fulfill us to the degree that we enter into what marriage actually is, right? So there are lots and lots of counterfeits right now, just like tons of things in life, right? that are counterfeits out there that we think I found the thing, but if it's not the actual thing of what it is, and I'm using thing in very loose quotes here, we end up disappointed. And especially if we have the presupposition coming from our own parents not living out the marriage the way it should be, dissolving the union, we may come to believe that's what my really should be. So I want to shift because we have a little bit of time remaining. I want to start shifting it to some sort of discussion on some practical suggestions. So let's go to this one first. Right. Let's say I'm a couple who's struggling in their own marriage right now. The D word is being thrown around a little bit, right? Or what would you say to those couples? Maybe 1, 2, or 3 practical things that they can do to strengthen their union. How would you begin that conversation with them?
Oh boy, I mean, what can they do? There's so much. This is what's glorious. The Lord is so creative with the ways in which He wants to help us. I mean, obviously, there's got to be wounds at that point, both within the relationship, and there's probably also unaddressed wounds from outside the relationship, maybe even a family of origin that's driving it. And that's what I find more often than not, at least in my ministry, is that there's a lot of unhealed family of origin wounds that overflow into the marriage itself. And so a lot of times couples realize that, like, hey, it's not me and my spouse that's the problem, it's these unaddressed wounds, and that sort of becomes the common enemy. But there might be, there's wounds in relationship. I would say I would also say something very important, is don't isolate yourselves. I see this again and again and again, that when people are going through difficulties, there's a tendency to pull back from seeking out help. So they might pull back from other friends who are married, who they look up to. They might pull back from their faith, from the priest. People who are suffering, you can either go and continue to ask for help, and that's what you should do, or you can pull back and isolate. And so often that isolation will just amplify. And if you look at your marriage too, it probably, the problems didn't come overnight. You probably drifted into that, right? And at each one of those small little moments that came up, rather than sort of leaning in or maybe trying to get help at that point, you sort of brushed it under the rug, right? Until it got so big. Well, I would just say, look, continue to seek out help. Don't isolate yourself. That's just going to make things a whole lot worse. And then also related to that, don't continue to hide the problem, both from yourself and from your spouse. Like, really directly nail it head on. And I would also say that it's very unhelpful for working on your marriage throwing out the D word. Like, I don't think a couple should ever throw out the divorce word. You might get what you wish for, and it won't help. I get it. It might be like a cry of pain in your heart. That's like how you feel like you might be taken seriously, but there's better ways of doing that. I definitely would never ever do that. I just personally, I think that is just that's very, very dangerous to start throwing that out, because I do know couples who, one, said it out of a desperation to try to get the spouse to work on things, and the spouse was just like, okay, fine, yeah, I'll do it. And it wasn't even like in his consideration. It wasn't even in his wheelhouse. It's just such a tragedy. And I've heard several of these stories like this. So just, get that out of there. Like, replace that word with hey, we got to get help. Something's not right. I am just miserable here. I need help. You need help. And then, I would, every couple's problems are different. So it's hard to give a prognostication, but I think the twofold things are looking at wounds. And then I think you said it too, like, try to renew your marriage as well. We can't just go, I guess this is like human motivation, right? That healing ultimately is not just getting rid of the wound. It's
Mhm.
turning that wound into a resource for your love. Okay, so that there's a
Mhm.
deeper sense there, but it also means a recovery of the love that you had. And so at the same time that you're working on healing in the wounds, try to rekindle that love. Go on the date
Mhm.
nights, go on the retreats that you have been putting off. Maybe it's a marriage retreat together as a couple. Um, so I always say, simultaneously recover the love that was lost and then also work on the wounds that are impeding it. Because there was some original love there. We believe that. And it's still there somewhere. We have to recover that. And I think that's an important perspective because again, I think sometimes when couples who've had so many difficulties, so much suffering, they get to a point where they forget that first love,
Mhm.
that first love that's always there. It's always present. You made a vow to one another. That's beautiful.
Mhm.
Recover it. So, in other words, you're not just simply dealing with wounds, but there's some love here too that you need to cultivate. So the wounds are sort of removing the obstacles, impeding that. It's important to look at that, but
Mhm.
also recovering the love that's there, that's still there, that is still there in some form, right? At the bottom of all that muck is that first love,
Mhm.
the vows that still remain. Um, and I think that's important because it's seeing God in my spouse, and I think
Mhm.
the healing is not only working in the wounds, but we need to see God in our spouse again to begin to do this work. And you have to find something of God in your spouse. And I don't care how many mistakes that they've made. There's something of God in every person, including in your
Ah,
spouse. And we have to step back. So we have to do the sort of the twofold work of recovering the love that's there, that there's something good to build upon, while also rooting out the weaknesses. And I will just say this: look, this is not Dr. Daniel Meola speaking. This is a tried and true method of the church. Like
mhm.
if you look at spiritual practices through the century, there's two great ways of developing your spiritual life: examining your conscience, all the sins and stuff you have to work on, coming up with a spiritual plan of life,
Mhm.
but also there's the way of gratitude, of seeing the ways in which you are cooperating with God and building upon that. And so healing has to work in both directions at the same time. It needs to be trying to remove sin, heal wounds, but also building on the ways in which you already are loving and building up the
Mhm.
kingdom of God in your marriage. And you are in some way, even just by persevering and remaining in the marriage.
Mhm.
There's something of God in that, even in perseverance. And I think it's Paul that talks about perseverance in itself. It may seem like you're just white knuckling it, but it's actually sending a great witness. It's saying this suffering will not get the better of me. And then Paul says
Amen.
that perseverance will build character, and that character unleashes hope. No, I think it no
Mhm.
perseverance. I think it goes perseverance, hope,
Suffering.
then character, right?
Yeah.
So I see that too. Like sometimes you just have to persevere, but that brings hope, and that
Mhm.
rekindles hope, and then eventually the character, the virtues, they eventually develop from there. So sometimes just
Yeah.
simply persevering is just such an amazing miracle and witness, saying, "I'm not going to let this suffering." I'm not going to let these wounds, I'm not going to let all this mess get the
Mhm.
better of us because God is still with us. He hasn't left us. We
Amen.
have a sacrament, or even if you're not in a sacramental marriage, there's still God in my spouse through the love in which we vowed to one another, the remaining. There's always something good to build upon. And the devil wants us to think that it's only a mess, it's only a wound, you're only the sum of your weaknesses for the marriage. And it's not
Uh,
true. It's a lie. It's a
oh, I
huge
mean,
lie.
Daniel, I need to unpack this because this is so critical, and I think for all of us who are hearing us, like every single one of us who's involved in marriage goes through dark times, right? This is one of the things we promise, right? In good times and in bad, in sickness and health, right? And we all about sickness, our both families recently, right? But I think this is of critical importance. So I just want to restate what I'm hearing, and especially to make this even more practical for people. So this is just sage advice that you're sharing, and I want to thank you for that. Number one, if you are a couple who is experiencing struggles in your marriage, but you want to make sure you don't become a stat. I mean, I picked up 5 elements. This is not an exhaustive list, but number 1, that family of origin, look at those wounds. Those things don't just go away. We've got to deal with them. Second, so important, Daniel, don't isolate, right? Where the lie I think we're told is we're the only ones who have ever gone through this. No one in the history of humanity has ever gone through this. And to quote Father Chad Rippinger on other elements, he says, if you think this, well, you're just not that special. Okay. I'm not okay. You're not okay. We're not okay. And that's okay. Let's enter into the mess here. Right. And a key word that I've phrase that I've learned, and I'm still learning, but it's been imbued in me, is to lean into your own pain, lean into the pain of your spouse, enter in there. Do not run from it. And especially, and this takes courage here. All this takes courage. Open this up to find one couple that you can trust and say, listen, we're a mess and we just need your support here. Can we go out as a couple and just chat through some things, right? Because I think the devil, it's divide and conquer, right? That's what the devil wants to do. He wants to get in there. He wants to drive a wedge in our own personal wounds. And then we project this garbage onto our spouse. And breeding the lie, the more that we sit in that place, this is irredeemable. This cannot be recovered. We here on this podcast want to call it the lie of that. No, this can be redeemed. Is there work here? Yeah, it is. Third, avoid the D word, right? Whatever language you got to do to replace that with, do that, right? Because again, words, just like God, the word creates everything. Christ, the word creates everything. What is true on the positive side in the spiritual life also can happen in the negative. So the more things that we are focusing on, we're going to give that energy. So we're focused on the D word. We're breathing life in that. So breathe life elsewhere into the things that actually bring life. Fourth, rekindle that love. Love this, Daniel. The date nights, right? Retreats. I frequently will say to guys who come into work with us, men and women who will come into work, especially the guys, right? If you want to prevent the D word from coming into your marriage, first thing out of the box is never stop dating. Just make sure you only date one person, your spouse, not your phone, not your job, not your boat. Okay, date her. Spend that significant time on it. You don't have to spend any money. Go for a walk. Push each other on the swings, not off the swings. Right. All those different things that we can be in there, and especially Daniel, like along these lines, key phrase you brought up here is how can I see God in my spouse? What we're talking about here is that revision. Is as difficult as things may be, as maybe your wife has a tendency to nag, maybe has issues of driving a wedge and digging into things, even when they are being ugly, right? We all have our moments of being ugly.
Yeah, can I pause you though?
Yeah.
Can I pause you there? I mean, okay, because this is like a very common scenario, right?
Yeah.
Where one spouse criticizes, the other one stonewalls or gets defensive. I think what we need to see in those situations is, first of all, it's not all bad. I kind of get annoyed when like men are like, "Oh, my wife's nagging and criticizing." I'm like, no, your wife is trying to express a need poorly. But praise God, she's trying to communicate with you and express your need. Because you know what's worse is when she shuts up and she's silent, you're one step away from divorce. Okay, that's even worse. Okay, so praise God, she's trying to speak to you and articulate her need, albeit not in the best way. And what you need to learn and what she needs to learn is how to be better emotionally responsive to each other's needs and to honor those needs. And to stop with your selfishness, with your complaining about, oh, my wife's criticizing again. Well, why? What's the truth to it? Okay, just like what's the truth to your pain and why you want to stonewall and avoid her. And it doesn't make you better just because you don't say any words. And stonewalling and avoiding and being defensive and brushing the problem under the rug is just as bad as the criticism. So I always try to turn that on the head. Like, what is good about this situation? What needs to be changed? And, that's, again, there's a God moment. Praise God, your wife is willing to communicate with you and express herself. That's part of vulnerability. And a relationship that does not have vulnerability is a relationship that is really heading towards the rocks. Now, again, there's better ways of doing it. I agree with you. It's not appropriate. But we got to see the good even in that behavior that annoys us. That needs to be our first predisposition rather than just simply it's bad. And there's a great book about this. The book that I really recommend to couples if they're struggling with marriage, and I'm talking about like if there's no addiction, abuse, those or addictions, abuse, those require specific um, interventions. Okay, but these communication difficulties is a great book called uh, "Created for Connection" by Dr. Sue Johnson. Um, she's a therapist. She's a marriage and family therapist. And it's written with a Christian lens. It's not a Catholic book, but I would say it's very Catholic. But she talks about, so when I was talking about recovering that love too, the date nights are important, but it's also becoming more emotionally intelligent and more emotionally responsive to the needs of your partner. It's having those deep conversations about not just the wounds, but how can we grow in love. So yes, part of our emotional needs is to just have fun, to enjoy hobbies and that together. But I don't want to reduce date nights to just simply having fun together. That's part of it. But if you go back to your first love, what was the number one thing those long dates nights would involve? It's usually really long conversations.
Yeah.
And it was like heart to heart, right? There was an emotional um, attunement and responsiveness. And over time, we can take that for granted and sort of lose that skill. We need to recover that. And so Dr. Sue Johnson, Created for Connection, does a really good job of talking about learning how to be emotionally responsive to your spouse. And to see that as a blessing, to see the differences not as a curse, but as an opportunity to learn and grow from one another. So again, that's why I paused that whole critical nagging comment that's so frequent with men, like, shut up. That's stupid. That's the way the secular world talks. Seriously, that's the way the secular world talks. I don't see Christ ever just complaining about criticism. Like, I mean, he does say that there's unjust criticism, certainly, but he always is looking for the good in the other and ennobling the other and seeing what's good and seeing first where I need to change too. I mean, this is the other thing, and I should have mentioned this is obviously in the top 5 things: forgiveness.
Yes.
Forgiveness. And it can't just be this one-time thing. It's got to be the area you got to be constantly forgiving one another and trying to make amends. I get it. It's not enough to just simply say I'm sorry, but that's important. That's important. It's important to say those words. It's important to say the words I'm forgiven or I forgive you. But then you also try to make amends as well, because a contrite heart wants to go and sin no more. That's part of the sacrament of confession. It needs to be part of it. But forgiveness. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, you can rewrite your story with mercy. And I always tell people, well, I'm not forgiving until she says I'm sorry. No, you forgive first. You forgive while before they say I'm sorry. That was Christ. He forgave us while we're enemies. He forgave us while we were still sinners. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Your spouse might not know what they do. Forgive them anyways. Be the first person to forgive them in the heart, to offer them a new beginning, to begin the reconciliation process. And forgiveness is a one-way street, but reconciliation is a two-way street. But forgiveness needs to precede reconciliation. So forgive them even before they say I'm sorry. You can seek the I'm sorry. You can seek the longer conversations. You can seek about how you can grow and make amends, but be the first to forgive. That's another kind of rule of our marriage. We Bethany and I try to seek to be the first to forgive. And it's got to come from a genuine place. It not just like a knee-jerk reaction to end the conversation. So my wife and I were very deliberate when I say I'm sorry. It's not usually, if we're in the middle of a fight, we usually have to take a break. So it's really deliberate, not just a means to end the conversation, something I say very quickly, knee-jerk, to get you off my back, right? Like, we don't want to use mercy and forgiveness to paper over the problem, right? So often, my wife and I, if we're in a fight or argument, which we do, by the way, I mean, I think all couples do. I mean, we need to get real about this. All couples have arguments. It's just what you do with them that makes you holy or builds up your marriage or brings it down. You do have to find ways to de-escalate and handle conflict in a holy way. And that's probably a whole nother podcast. But we often take a break in the big fights. I mean, I'm not talking about the little annoyances, we can resolve pretty quickly, but the bigger fights, right? We usually have to take a break and then come back and say, I'm sorry, and I forgive you, for that to be meaningful and not to be sort of like kind of a cheap apology. So anyways, there's a whole thing I could say here about forgiveness, by the way, is a huge part of our ministry. Obviously, we haven't talked a lot about the children of divorce forgiving their parents. We got on this beautiful topic of marriage, which is great. But forgiveness it's crucial to healing. So if you've experienced a lot of wounds, there is no way to heal wounds in marriage or any serious wound where somebody has really deeply hurt you. I'm not talking just like a little bit, but like really deeply, without forgiveness. And forgiveness 70 times 7 times, meaning you're going to be forgiving probably the other person for that same fault multiple times. Do it anyways. Forgive.
And if you're counting 440, if you're counting 449, then or 490, you're missing the point. Whatever the math is on 7 times 70, right? Right. It's that continuous. So, and Daniel, absolute critical things here. And apparently, the Holy Spirit's in charge of this conversation because where it needs to go. And I want to we'll get there in a second, but I think that vulnerability so critically important, and all these things are undergirding. I think we want to make this very explicit here. You've got to be working on your own personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You've got to be entering into your own deep. We cannot forgive unless we first know we are forgiven by God. And we are already, but we've got to receive that. We got to say, yes, I know that I'm a sinner. Please forgive me. This is why the church really encourages us to engage the sacraments very frequently, at least weekly going to liturgy, at least monthly going to confession. That I would recommend it. I try to go once every 2 weeks at least, because I know how much I screw things up in my own marriage. Need that, right? So that I can, what I have received, then from that heart that it's been broken open, I can enter in and seek and be raced to forgive first, right? I love that whole thing. Again, the image of going on the race that I'm dead on. I want to win. That's because we get caught. Couples get caught. I want to win the forgiveness. And I think what will happen is that level of intimacy and connection is going to connect there because we're made for that connection. It's good. So let's
can I you brought up a good point. To do the type of forgiveness I'm recommending requires the grace of God. So you're absolutely right. We need to receive that grace first. And that's why, like in the Our Father prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. There's an order there. We first need to receive forgiveness to be able to forgive others. But what's interesting is also our forgiveness is conditional on forgiving others. So there's this nice little paradoxical loop. But I often tell people that means we first have to receive forgiveness, and we better be confessing withholding forgiveness if that's a struggle of ours, right? That's a sin because God makes it a condition of our own forgiveness. But you're absolutely right. We need to receive the grace of the sacrament confession of forgiveness from God first before to be able to give the type of forgiveness I'm suggesting, which is a divine type of forgiveness, the 70 times 7, the love of enemies. We need to first receive that grace of forgiveness ourselves, and that's important. And let me just say one other practical thing about this, and this is why God is so much smarter than we are. So, the Our Father, where he starts with acknowledgement of our own need of forgiveness, moving outwards towards forgiving others, gets really practical in marriage. Because our first response, again, to go back to this very common scenario, and I catch myself on the better days that I do this. Sometimes my sin takes over and I try to win the argument, right? Instead of listen to my spouse's need and empathize and truly come to a true reconciliation or a true dialogue. But the situation you talked about with somebody, spouse criticizes you, okay? Like, our first response should be, if we acknowledge our own sinfulness, is there any truth to this? Is there any truth to this? Is there any truth to this criticism? Okay, maybe I don't fully agree with it, but is there any truth to it? More often than not, when I ask myself that of something my wife is criticizing me about, I realize, she's onto something because I'm a sinner. There is a truth here. Okay, maybe I didn't like her presentation of it. Maybe that was
Mm-hmm.
wrong. We can talk about that later, but there's a truth here. So our first response to criticism is there any truth to it? And more often than not, again, sometimes there's really unjust criticism, or maybe, maybe our spouse is having a bad day and they spouted off and they really didn't mean it. And there's no justification. But
Mm-hmm.
more often than not, it's like, is there any truth to this? Let me give you an example from my own marriage. Like,
Yeah, please.
you know, my wife's criticizing me for being late, for getting going in the morning, or getting to mass, or getting to an engagement we agreed upon, right? Um, early in my marriage, I would get kind of annoyed and think that, oh, this is just difference. I come from an Italian family, we're more laid back. She comes from a German family, which is more punctual. Um, Whatever, we just need to compromise. But then I was like, wait a sec, there's a truth to this. You
Mm-hmm.
know what? I I need to do better here. I need to try to be punctual. We did agree to go to this engagement at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually selfish for me to think my time is more important than her time, which is what it was after I got to think about it. And then when it comes to mass, like, of course we should be punctual. God wants us to be punctual. Now, again, I get it. I have 2 kids. Sometimes there's things out of your control, and you end up late. Kids sick, kids dawdling. They don't have the same, you know, reason that we have. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I had this profound recognition that, yeah, I was being kind of selfish with my time. This had nothing to do with differences. This had nothing to do with preferences. But yeah, we agreed to be there at that time. I prioritized something else, work or reading or something that caused us to be late. That's on me.
Mm-hmm.
That's on me. I shouldn't pick that fight. So there's a truth there, and I apologize. I said, you know what? I've been a little bit selfish, prioritizing my time over the agreed upon time that we decided to go out. And this was preventable. This wasn't something that came out of nowhere that I didn't have control on. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I'm sorry about that. And then later
It's
on, maybe I
beautiful.
would talk about, like, hey, next time, can you, maybe say that in a better tone. But, in that moment, I just simply, you know, acknowledged it and manned up. So my first reaction is like, is there any truth? Is there any truth to this? So anyways, and
And
that's
well,
Jesus' method of being humble and recognizing our own faults first.
and I want to add a piece, because I know this is what you're saying. It is dead on. It's when we get there's an emotional investment into our own perspective. The whole "I want to be right" thing. That's when I know when my own emotions come up, when there's a disagreement. Sometimes my anger will rise up, right, and I become like a teenager. I get caught in my teenage brain, and I can't hear this logic here. So again, this is where I would say to anybody who maybe this is you, who are some similarities to what I do. Count to 10. Take deep breaths through there. I like to use the bubble mechanisms, right? If you are try saying the word bubbles in a really angry voice. It ain't gonna work. Okay, you can't do that. And so it diffuses the situations we're in, right? And so when we can do that, when we can start to laugh a little bit, it's not to say that situation isn't the issue at hand is not important, but we've got to bring a little levity in there, and then we can actually start listening to what our spouse is saying, you know what, maybe they have a good point here. Maybe there's a kernel of truth here. The way it's being presented, I'm not receiving. Also, maybe we need to work on how it's being presented, right? But the genuine need needs to be presented, and we need to be able to listen to that and respond in genuine love. We may not agree. We don't have to agree, but we have a duty to speak and receive the person respectfully, and to see them, God sees them. That's critical there. So, Daniel, I know we're going a little late, and if you'll give me a little bit of leverage on, I want to go to 2 more things, hopefully briefly here, for the children of divorce who've experienced this, right? Especially if you want to bring any of your own experiences in here, if you're willing to get vulnerable with us. Let's just go with like 2 things. Start that process of healing. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so I would recommend reading some stories by other adult children divorced. You can go to our blog, Life Giving
Mm,
Wounds. Blog is a lot of great first person testimony stories. Because I mean, I think often we sort of maybe know that there's a problem there, but are unsure. And it's not until hearing another person's story that you're like, oh yeah, that's it. Or it
Mm.
begins the healing journey. So, I always say, or a friend of mine, sorry, I'm pulling this analogy from a friend. A lot of us adult children divorced are like walking around with a phantom limb. And if you know the experience of a phantom limb,
Yes.
that you think you have a limb, but it's actually you're missing it. And it's
Mhm.
like it's often the case with the effects of parental divorce. We don't even realize it, often not until adulthood. This is very common, that we're missing something very important. This is really affecting us. And that's an analogy, by the way, not my own, taken from a friend who's explaining her own healing journey. Um,
Mm.
and so I would say just, start reading, and you'll either get confirmed that, okay, you're okay, or it's going to start bringing
Mm.
up stuff. So,
Yeah.
but then
Yes.
related to that is grieve, to grieve it, to
Mm.
give yourself permission that there was a loss. Again, we've normalized this so much in our society that, and there's all sorts of platitudes. My parents did the best that they could, etc. That um, paper over the severe loss. And so give yourself permission to grieve. And when you do that, you might then see the ways in which it's maybe impacting you as an adult. So grieve, read other stories about other adult
Mm.
children divorce. And again, one of two things will happen. You'll either get reconfirmed that, hey, I'm okay, or two, oh yeah, there's something here. And more often than not, there's something here, because usually it
Mm.
does affect us into adulthood. And I just want to say, it's a scary thing to acknowledge wounds, or maybe that there's been this
Mhm.
wound for a while that you're now just acknowledging. It's very
Mhm.
common. Okay, for a
Yes.
lot of different reasons, we as kids couldn't process the trauma or all the dysfunction or the problems because we were growing up. Our brains weren't even fully developed, right? And so it's very common. It happens in
Mhm.
particular in young adulthood, but it could also happen later in adulthood, that you're able to now finally be in a place you have more independence from your parents, because there's a lot of dynamics where, like, I don't know if I want
Mhm.
to bring this up because I'm worried it's going to rock the boat. I'm going to be perceived as being disloyal, ungrateful, a brat, wallowing in self-pity. There's all these like negative scripts
Mhm.
we can run. um but you're not alone. There's tons of us. It wasn't until adulthood that we felt like we could finally process this. So again, give yourself that grief. And then another thing is, a lot of us, I think, are afraid of wounds because they're just going to create more mess. If we bring them up, if we look at this, it's just going to create more mess. Or worse, people are going to judge us. It's something to be
Mhm.
ashamed about. Um, and what I want to say there is, you shouldn't be ashamed. You should not be
Yes.
ashamed. There's not a single unwounded person here on earth. We all have wounds that are different. Um, but we're all, none of us leave this life unscathed. None of us. And you shouldn't be ashamed of that. And certainly something like parental divorce, it was not your fault. It was not your fault. It was not your fault.
Mhm.
And there's a lot to be said about that false guilt, that somehow it is your fault. Even if you said, I want my parents to divorce, it was still always their decision. That was not your decision, right? So there's a lot to be said why you maybe said that. It might have been as a little kid, you were just crying out, I want the conflict to stop. And you didn't have the
Mhm.
capacity of knowing anything different, whatever. We can get into all that dynamics that I talk to people about on a regular basis. But what I want to say is, read the stories, give yourself permission to grieve, and explore this. Don't
Great.
be ashamed.
Mhm.
Don't be ashamed. Um, because here's the good news. The good news too is,
Mm.
if done in the context of faith, done with the
Yes.
Lord, if you invite Christ into the pain, that's my third thing, and invite Christ into the pain. If you invite Christ into the pain, he will eventually not just heal you. Well, I will say the deepest level of healing is, he will take that wound and make it a resource for your life. Meaning, what is once maybe a cross suffering holds you back in an area,
Yes.
can actually become this tremendous resource for your
Yes.
life in so many different areas. So that's the great news of when you invite
Mm.
Christ in the pain. You work through the healing process, and it takes a long time. It's not necessarily linear. There can be setbacks. There's many layers to it, but every layer is a lesson for love, and every layer, the Lord is turning that healing it, using it as a resource for your life. So it can be something good. It's not necessarily just a mess. People are not just simply messes. So there's a lot to be said there, but I think these are the things that I often, when talking with people who are thinking about it the first time, or maybe again have said all their life that they're fine, but they really never have examined it. And I would just say too, if you've never really examined this, you can't really know for sure if you're fine, but maybe you have experienced healing. You know, I'm not saying that every adult child of divorce hasn't experienced healing by the time that they're adult. Relationships can be incredibly healing. Marriages, a good friendship, maybe one parent was really involved in your life. All these things can add, but unless you really examine in adulthood, you know, you're not going to really know for sure. There might be something more there the Lord wants to heal. So those would be some of the things somebody just starting off to look at.
Dr. Daniel, thank you. Beautiful. And so I want to just comment briefly on what you just shared. And an idea popped in my head as you're talking about this, that it's often been described, especially St. John Paul II described us living in a culture of death. And I think a culture of death denies the reality of death. And without this acknowledgement, without entering into that, there can be no resurrection. So if we deny the reality that there's been a death that happened by going through divorce, then what we're doing, we're saying that this moving forward is an impossibility. But as the old phrase goes, right, the emotions buried alive are still alive. That stuff is still going on. And we've got to learn to bring these up, to draw this out, to allow Christ to open up. Like, and the complaint of Martha at the tomb of Lazarus, Lord, if you do it, it's going to smell. This might smell a little bit. It might. It's okay. Yeah. Open it up. Bring disinfection here, because Christ does not condemn you. He does not say that you are unlovable. He does not say that you cannot be redeemed. No, he calls you forth to embrace your greatness. But our way forward is not avoiding the pain. Our way is to enter into the cross. In the cross is transformation. This is the beauty of our faith, my brothers and sisters. So, Dr. Daniel, and thank you for all that you're sharing here, all the work you're doing. And obviously, like, this is the tip of the iceberg, right? So,
yeah, we didn't talk too much actually about the children in divorce. So, by the way, while we do strengthen marriage and we do accompany people in marriages that are struggling, my primary mission is to help adult children in divorce. So I want to make a plug. You got very little about that, but this is my life's work that I've dedicated to. So if you're an adult child divorce separation listening to this, please find out more about our mission and our ministry.
Well, that's my final question to you on this segment here. What are the outreaches of Life Giving Wounds? How would you qualify it, and where can people get to know your work more?
Yeah, I mean, so we're in 10 dioceses now. I would love to come to Texas. So any of your Texas listeners,
we got to work on that. Let's see what we can do about
that. Texas is a big state that I have a dream of wanting to be in there sometime. We have a lot of alumni, but no chapters. But anyways, we have 10 chapters across the country in various dioceses. You can find it at lifegivingwounds.org that offer in-person retreats and support groups. We also do online ministry. We have a Lenten support group coming up. And so I want to encourage all of you, if you don't have a local chapter near you, to join us for our Lenten support group, where we bring in some great speakers, almost all who are adult children divorce or experts in their fields, to talk about a lot of these different topics of wounds that maybe are impacting us still as adults from parental divorce or the ongoing dysfunction in our families. Yeah, our website is also, there's a lot of resources on there. There's a blog with over 100 articles with a lot of helpful tips and, stories to help you on your healing journey. We'll be coming out with a book later this year. So wonderful. Stay tuned. Yeah, stay tuned.
Do you have a name on it?
Do you have a name on it? I can't announce it yet. No, I can't.
Okay.
So the title hasn't been
determined.
Finalized. Yeah, a major Catholic publisher. I'm on embargo right now. But stay tuned and get sign up for our newsletter. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us through our website, lifegivingwounds.org. Oh, we have some retreats coming up. I should say, like if you're near Kansas City, let's see, our next retreats are Kansas City, San Francisco, Atlanta, Georgia, University of Maryland, that's a college student only retreat. But if you're a student in DC listening to this show, you can come to that. Yeah, and all our chapters will be hosting an annual retreat at some point. Denver has a retreat coming up.
Wonderful.
So anyways, if you live in one of those areas, please join us. If you don't live in one of those areas, well, you can't fly into, but you can also join us for our Lenten support group, which you can sign up for and find out more info at lifegivingwounds.org.
Awesome. Dr. Daniel, a privilege and honor to be with you. And yes, if I have anything to do, one of my great strengths is connecting people. So this will not be our last conversation about this, offline and maybe online. So let's see what the Lord can do. But you are, thank you for saying yes to going where the pain leads, not to a destructive lifestyle, but really giving life, which is obviously what Life Giving Wounds is about. Thank you, and giving permission, I should say, to others to open up their own wounds, to get real about that, and to be brought to the healer, Jesus Christ, who can make all things new. So thank you for that. Now, what we've been doing in recent podcasts, we to change things up, to help people to get to know our guests a little more, we have something called the 12. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a series of 12 questions. These are very different from the softball questions I gave you. And I encourage you, kind of the first thing that comes to the top of your mind on the questions. Don't overthink it too much. And just offer that to the world here. No pressure here, but I think you'll enjoy this. Are you ready for the 12?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Number 1, peanut butter, creamy or crunchy?
Crunchy.
It is. Number 2, if you could be any Star Wars character, who would you be?
Oh, I love Star Wars. That's a hard question. Yoda. For sure.
Yoda or Grogu?
Grogu's cute, but he still has to prove himself. So Yoda's a Jedi master, and he just talks really cool. I wish I could talk that way. It was like, happy I am.
Yes, it's bad. It's bad. Oh gosh, grammatics. He's grammatically incorrect to us proper English speakers, perhaps.
But I love it. It sounds so wise and it's hilarious and it cracks me up. So definitely Yoda.
Yes, I'll go with that. Number 3, what is your desert island food?
Desert island. Whatever can keep me alive. So, I don't know. Like, what's the best food if you can only have one food to live? Not that I'm afraid of death, but I hope I wouldn't be on the desert island forever. I don't know. Oh my gosh. I don't know. Something I like. But for whatever reason, I'm thinking mangoes because they're on the desert island.
Mangoes are good, dude. I'll receive that. Mangoes. Okay. Number 4 is a 2-parter. Beer or wine?
Wine.
Which one? What kind?
I love a good Chianti.
Nice. You are an Italian. Very good. Number 5. What is the most memorable Christmas gift you received growing up?
Oh, see, it's so interesting. Okay. Most memorable. A lot of adult children divorce will tell you that the holidays are sometimes the hardest. So sometimes the bad memories stand out more than the good. Best Christmas gift. Can it be a gift that I gave?
Sure. We'll open that up.
Okay. I'm really proud of a statue of Mary that I gave to my mom that I earned with my own money when I was 7 years old. And I remember her crying, and I just remember feeling like $1 million that I gave her, this like white porcelain Mary. And it just brought me so much joy. I brought her joy. So it kind of stands out.
I love it. Beautiful. Number 6. What is your bucket list country or city?
Well, right now I have a huge desire. I hope I get to it before I'm retired, to go to Lourdes. Definitely go to Lourdes. Yeah.
I highly recommend it, and don't do what I did and don't just sit in the water. Go lay back, go all the way back. So
Okay.
I'll leave it there.
Yeah. I'm jealous
Number
you were
7.
able to go. Yeah.
Well, it is well worth it. I'm going to pray that happens, and maybe a practical thing. And I know it's tough with families. Are putting $50 to $75 a month, and within a year you'll be there. That's my thought. So,
Okay. It has to be with my wife, though. I want to go with my wife.
okay. Well, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray for this. Come, Lord Jesus. In Jesus' name, I claim Lords within the year for the Meolas. Look at this. Number 7. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, I love Marvel too. So I'm like going through my favorite characters. Oh man, just one?
Just one.
Can I have like one to rule them all? The one superpower to rule them all.
You want Thanos?
I'm blending Lord of the Rings and superpower.
Yes,
I
you
want
are.
the one superpower to rule them all. I don't know. There's so many cool ones. Let's go with. I want to go with like a lesser known. I don't know. I've always liked the Scarlet Witch, WandaVision. She had this like ability to like. She's such a powerful being. So we'll go with Wanda's superpowers, if you know her.
She can
grieve.
reality.
And she can grieve. She can grieve
in
bad ways.
Yes. That's true. So obviously we want to take all those things and bring them into the light, not into the darkness. We'll take that.
She's actually not good at grieving. But her superpowers are pretty awesome.
I'll take that. Very cool. All right, number 8, 2-part question. Have you seen The Chosen?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Impossible question. What's your favorite
episode, or what did you say?
Impossible question. What's your favorite episode?
Probably season 2, episode 1. I just love the dynamic between John and Mary, and how John gets the inspiration for his words. It was just such a beautiful opening. Like, I don't know, that one stands out to me. I forget the name of the show, but I just remember it.
I forget the first one, but obviously the way the Gospels are created there, really, really beautiful. The way the writers interacted that, I love it.
I just love Mary.
Number 9.
And she got a lot of airtime in that one. So,
and I think she'll be coming back for more airtime. We'll find out. But here we go. Number 9. Besides obviously your name and date, what do you want written on your tombstone?
How about, I haven't thought about this. How about I'll go with our marriage motto. My wife and I have a marriage motto. It comes from Pope Benedict, now recently deceased. God bless his soul. Pray for his soul. Love in excess. That's our marriage motto. Love in excess. Pope Benedict taught that the only good excess in life is love. So it was a quote inspired by him. So we'll go with that. I don't know if that'll be written on my tombstone or not, but that's always been our marriage motto of what we've been going for. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think one of our guests was obviously being funny, but I think he said, "I tried." So
that's a better answer.
but maybe we'll add to that. I tried to live excess love. I love it. It's good.
I tried.
Number 10. If you had to pick a favorite saint, who would it be?
Oh, come on.
I know that I said these are the 12. Here we go.
Are we including Mary in the,
you can pick any as long as they're in the canonized
saints. She's the queen. I've been really pressing into my relationship with Mary of late. Well, let's go with some unknown adult children divorce. There are some adult children divorce who were saints. Saint Eugene de Mazenod. I really like him. People should look him up. He's an adult child divorce. He's the first adult child divorce, I think, canonized, I believe. So, because divorce was rare for so long.
Saint Eugene Demas.
Yeah, I'm saying the name. It's French. I'm saying it wrong. See, I've never visited France. This is why it's on my bucket list. So, all French speakers, please forgive me out there.
Oui. Okay. Good. You have a scene I need to go check out. And this is also another sign of where the glory that we're called to, right? The family is so huge, and in a certain sense, my brothers and sisters, it's one giant project of restoring this marriage, a broken marriage. Christ can make it all new. I love it. It's beautiful. And these are family members we've never met. And then you bring the East in. Oh my gosh, it's going to be gross. So here we go. Let's just make the list, though. That's the kicker there, Dr. Daniel. Number 11. If you had to be martyred, how would you want to go out?
Oh, see, the church says you shouldn't desire martyrdom. If it happens, you should accept it, but you shouldn't desire it. So I haven't given much thought trying to follow that precept. In whatever way brings the most glory to God. I mean, honestly, I don't know. Like, what's that's like saying what's the right way to die? I don't know. I mean, I hope. Yeah, I don't know.
I think I think you've hit it on the head. Do the divine will, and then leave the rest to God.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd have the strength to stomach a lot of torture. So I hope the martyrdom would be quick. I'm a weak person when it comes to physical pain, but I hope at the grace in the moment, the Lord will allow me to persevere. But I guess if I had a wish, it'd be quick.
Although you have Ignatius of Antioch, the story goes he would go from town to town, like insulting Roman soldiers with the hope of being martyred. So I don't think we need to do that so far. But the saints were zealous in many ways. So number 12, why be Catholic?
Jeez, why be Catholic? Well, I am Catholic because, oh my gosh, I mean, it's the fulfillment. It's the fulfillment of all I could hope for. And I'm so grateful for the faith, the treasures of my faith, for the sacraments, for the truth, for the saints, for all the good that Catholicism, Christ through Catholicism. I mean, the church is his church, despite all the scandal and muck and mess. Like, at the end of the day, he's the one that founded it, and he's still present. But let's make this a little bit more personal. I am Catholic because in the Catholic Church, I've experienced the perfect marriage of Christ with the church, and that's been healing, and that's been joyful, and I love it.
Beautiful. Dr. Daniel, I couldn't have said it better. I want to thank you for the man that you are, for the husband and father that you are striving to be, and for just this beautiful gift of sharing your time with us today, but especially the work that you're doing with Life-Giving Wounds. Again, this is Dr. Daniel Meola with lifegivingwounds.org. I encourage all of you to check out his work and the work of his wife and what they are doing. I believe is a critical ministry needed for church in our days. We are days of great, as great wounds we find here, there's even greater grace that we're going to find that's going to be unleashed. You'll say yes to it. Fiat, say yes to it. So, Dr. Daniel, a pleasure and a privilege to have you. And yes, we will work on getting you and your work into Texas. Mark my word. We'll find out what the Lord does. And for all of those who for joining here, a very powerful conversation. I encourage you to like, to share, to offer this to others, and to support the work that we're doing here, because these are conversations that are desperately needed for those who are deeply wounded, and there are answers that everything is redeemable, nothing is wasted. So may everything we do give glory to the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. I'm Steve Pokorny, the founder of Freedom Coaching, is the Redeemed Vision podcast. And until next time, may you be blessed and do the divine will of the Father.
The Redeemed Vision podcast is an outreach of Freedom Coaching. To learn more, check out freedom-coaching.net and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and MeWe.